You know, there's something quite peculiar about the way we've arranged our lives in this modern age. We're surrounded by more warnings than ever before, warnings about climate change, about technology consuming our attention, about the collapse of meaning in our societies, and yet we continue, almost compulsively, rushing toward precisely what we claim to fear. It's as if we're passengers on a train, watching the landscape blur past our windows, occasionally remarking we seem to be going awfully fast, while never once considering that we might actually pull the emergency brake. Alan Watts spent his final years observing this peculiar human condition with increasing urgency. Not the urgency of panic, mind you, but the urgency of someone watching a sleepwalker approach the edge of a cliff. His warning wasn't really about external dangers at all. It was about something far more fundamental, the way we've become so hypnotized by our own symbolic systems, our own abstractions, that we've lost touch with the living reality that's always been right here. The warning we're ignoring isn't written in catastrophic predictions or apocalyptic prophecies. It's whispered in every moment of anxiety, every sensation of emptiness, every compulsive reach for our phones, every restless night wondering if this is really all there is. We've become, in Watts' words, a civilization of people trying to live in our heads while treating the physical world, including our own bodies, as merely mechanical instruments to serve our mental abstractions. And this, perhaps, is the deepest warning of all. That we're in danger of forgetting what it means to actually exist, to actually be here, to participate in the living present rather than constantly projecting ourselves into an imaginary future or clinging to memories of a past that exists nowhere except in thought. Consider for a moment how we've organized modern life. We wake to alarms that interrupt our natural rhythms, hurry through breakfast while scrolling through carefully curated images of other people's lives, commute through traffic while listening to podcasts about productivity, work at jobs where we're measured by abstract metrics, and return home exhausted to streaming services offering us thousands of ways to avoid simply being present with ourselves. Every moment scheduled, every experience documented, every silence filled with content. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. We know something is wrong. We feel it in our bones, this persistent sense that we're missing something essential, that life is somehow passing us by even as we frantically try to capture and control it. The anxiety epidemic, the depression epidemic, the loneliness epidemic, these aren't separate problems requiring separate solutions. They're symptoms of a single underlying condition. Our profound disconnection from the immediate, sensory, present moment reality of existence itself. Watts saw this coming decades ago. He watched as we transformed ourselves from human beings into what he called skin-encapsulated egos, isolated islands of consciousness, locked inside our skulls, desperately trying to control a universe that we've conceptually separated ourselves from. We've become strangers to our own experience, tourists in our own lives, constantly trying to get somewhere else, become someone else, achieve something more, as if the present moment were merely an obstacle to be overcome on the way to some imaginary future perfection. What would it mean to actually hear this warning? Not to understand it intellectually, that's easy enough, but to truly receive it, to let it penetrate beneath our layers of psychological defense and conceptual armor? Have you noticed how we've become experts at turning even the deepest insights into mere information, collecting spiritual wisdom like we collect streaming subscriptions, never actually allowing any of it to fundamentally change how we experience being alive? The warning Watts offered wasn't meant to be comforting. It wasn't designed to give us 5 easy steps to enlightenment or a technique we could add to our arsenal of self-improvement strategies. It was something far more unsettling. An invitation to recognize that the very way we're approaching existence, this constant effort to improve ourselves, fix ourselves, optimize ourselves, is itself the core of the problem. Think about the strange logic we've adopted. We believe we're separate individuals who must, through tremendous effort and willpower, force ourselves to be present, to be mindful, to be authentic. We attend workshops on spontaneity. We schedule time for relaxation. We set reminders to be mindful. We're trying to engineer our way back to something that never required engineering in the first place, the simple, immediate experience of being alive. This is where the warning becomes truly urgent, because we're now applying this same mechanistic thinking to everything. We're trying to optimize our relationships through communication techniques, optimize our happiness through positive psychology interventions, optimize our consciousness through meditation apps and biohacking protocols. We've turned life itself into a problem to be solved, a system to be debugged, a machine to be fine-tuned. But life isn't a machine. Consciousness isn't a computer program. And you, whatever you truly are, aren't a separate entity piloting a biological robot through a mechanical universe. This is what we're ignoring. The invitation to recognize that we are not separate from the world we're trying to control. We are the world, momentarily organized as individual perspectives, waves temporarily distinguishing themselves from the ocean while never actually being separate from it. The urgency isn't about saving ourselves from some external threat. It's about waking up from the trance of separation itself. Look at how we approach our problems. Environmental crisis? We need better technology. Social fragmentation? We need better communication platforms. Mental health epidemic? We need more interventions, more treatments, more optimization. Always more doing, more trying, more effort to fix what we've convinced ourselves is broken. What if nothing is broken? What if the crisis isn't that we need to become something other than what we are, but that we've forgotten what we've always been? What if the solution isn't more technology, more effort, more strategies, but simply, and this is the hardest thing in the world for the modern mind to accept, simply stopping long enough to actually be here? The real warning isn't about environmental collapse or technological singularity or social disintegration, though these are certainly reflecting something. The real warning is about what happens when an entire civilization becomes so entranced by its own symbols, its own maps, its own conceptual models, that it loses touch with the territory itself, with direct, immediate, lived reality. We're living in a hall of mirrors, reacting to reflections of reflections, never quite managing to turn around and see what's actually here. We photograph sunsets instead of watching them. We document experiences instead of having them. We think about life instead of living it. And somehow, we've convinced ourselves that this is normal, that this is just how human consciousness works, never considering that we might be suffering from a kind of collective hypnosis. What's called this the taboo against knowing who you are. We're taught from childhood that we're separate egos, isolated centers of consciousness, skin-encapsulated souls that must compete and struggle in a world of other separate egos. This story becomes so deeply embedded in our experience that we can't see it as a story anymore. It becomes reality itself. But what if it's not reality? What if it's just a very convincing hallucination, a consensual fiction we've all agreed to believe in? Consider the paradox at the heart of our modern anxiety. We're constantly trying to find ourselves, know ourselves, improve ourselves, express ourselves. But who is this self that's doing the finding, the knowing, the improving? Who is the you that you're trying to discover? It's like an eye trying to see itself, a knife trying to cut itself, a fire trying to burn itself. The search for who you truly are is itself the obstacle to recognizing what you've always been. This is why all our efforts to fix ourselves, improve ourselves, find ourselves, keep leading to more anxiety, more searching, more sense that something essential is missing. We're looking for something we've never actually lost. We're trying to become something we already are. We're searching everywhere for home while standing on our own doorstep. What's understood that this isn't a philosophical puzzle to be solved intellectually. You can't think your way out of a problem that's created by thought itself. You can't use your ego to transcend your ego. You can't practice being spontaneous or try to stop trying. These are all variations of the same trap, using the very mode of consciousness that creates the problem to try to solve the problem. So what's the alternative? This is where the warning becomes an invitation. Not to do something different, but to recognize what's happening when you're not doing anything at all. To notice the awareness that's present before thought arises, before problems are constructed, before the separate self steps forward to claim ownership of experience. Right now, in this very moment, there's the simple fact of awareness. Not your awareness, as if you were a separate entity who possesses consciousness. Just awareness itself, happening. The sounds around you, the sensation of breathing, the play of light and shadow, it's all arising in this awareness, which is somehow both intimate and impersonal, both yours and not yours, both inside and outside, both everything and nothing. This isn't mystical jargon. It's the most obvious thing in the world, except we've been trained not to notice it. We've been trained to focus on the content of consciousness, all the thoughts, sensations, emotions, experiences, while completely overlooking the consciousness itself in which everything appears. Imagine watching a movie and becoming so absorbed in the plot that you forget you're watching a screen. You identify with the characters, get anxious about their problems, celebrate their victories, mourn their losses, all while never noticing that it's all just patterns of light and shadow dancing on a surface. The drama seems absolutely real until you remember. Oh yes, I'm sitting in a theater watching a movie. This is what was pointing to. We're so absorbed in the drama of our personal story, our successes and failures, our memories and plans, our problems and solutions, that we've forgotten the simple awareness in which this entire drama is appearing. And that forgetting is the source of all our suffering. Not because awareness is somewhere else, somewhere we need to get to, but because we're trying to live as something we're not, a separate, isolated ego, while ignoring what we actually are. This open, spacious, present awareness itself. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The modern world isn't just accidentally structured to keep us from recognizing this. In a sense, our entire civilization is a massive technology for maintaining the illusion of separation. Every institution, every social structure, every economic system is built on the assumption that we're separate egos competing for scarce resources in a universe of other separate egos. Our education system trains us to think abstractly, to live in our heads, to treat direct experience as somehow less real than conceptual knowledge. Our economy depends on maintaining a constant sense of lack, of not enoughness, of needing the next thing to finally be complete. Our technology increasingly mediates every experience, putting layers of screens and symbols between us in direct contact with reality. We've created a world that makes it almost impossible to simply be present, to simply be here, to simply recognize what we are. And then we wonder why we're anxious, depressed, addicted, lost. If this resonates with you, if you recognize this pattern in your own experience, share your insight in the comments. Not to perform spiritual knowledge, but because there's something profound about acknowledging what we see when the usual defenses come down. This isn't about reaching any conclusion. It's about staying with the question. What if everything I've been taught about who I am is just a story? What if there's something more fundamental here, something that's been present all along, something that doesn't need to be achieved because it's never been absent? The warning what's offered becomes more urgent the more we try to solve our problems with the same consciousness that created them. We're trying to think our way out of existential anxiety. We're trying to consume our way out of emptiness. We're trying to optimize our way to liberation. And it's not working. It's never going to work. Not because we're doing it wrong, but because the entire approach is fundamentally confused. Consider how we approach meditation, spiritual practice, even these teachings about presence and awareness. We turn them into projects. We create goals. I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes every day. I'm going to become more present. I'm going to achieve enlightenment. We're still operating from the same egoic consciousness, just directing it towards spiritual objectives instead of material ones. But presence isn't an achievement. Awareness isn't a state you attain through effort. What you truly are isn't something you become. It's already here. It's already happening. It's what's reading these words right now, what's hearing sounds, what's noticing thoughts arising and passing. Not you as a separate entity having experiences, but the experiencing itself, which doesn't belong to anyone because it precedes the very idea of separate persons. This is the dimension of reality we've learned to ignore. We've been trained to focus on objects, things, thoughts, sensations, experiences, while completely overlooking the subject, the awareness itself that knows all objects. And because we're looking for it as an object, as something separate we can grasp and possess, we never find it. It's not an object. It's the space in which all objects appear. What's often used the metaphor of space to point to this. We think space is nothing, just empty background. But actually, space is what allows everything to exist. Without space, there couldn't be any objects, any movement, any change, any experience. Space is the most fundamental reality, even though we usually ignore it to focus on the things appearing in it. Consciousness is like that. We think it's nothing, just the passive background of experience. But actually, it's the most intimate, immediate, undeniable reality. It's what you are more fundamentally than any thought, sensation, or experience. It's what remains when everything else changes. It's what was present when you were a child, what's present now, what will be present in old age, the unchanging awareness witnessing the constant flow of change. But here's the paradox that makes the modern mind uncomfortable. You can't grasp this intellectually. You can't make it into a belief system, a philosophy, a technique. The moment you try to capture it in concepts, you've already missed it. Because it's not a thing that can be possessed. It's what you are before you become anything at all. This is what we're running from when we stay busy, when we stay distracted, when we stay lost in thought. Not from something scary or dangerous, but from the profound simplicity of just being here, without agenda, without trying to get anywhere or become anyone. We're running from the recognition that we don't need to be fixed, improved, optimized, or saved, because what we truly are has never been broken. The crisis of our time isn't really about climate, technology, economics, or politics, though these are certainly important manifestations. The crisis is that we've become so alienated from our own nature, so disconnected from immediate reality, so lost in abstractions and symbols, that we're trying to live as something we're not. We're trying to live as separate egos in a mechanical universe, fighting for survival, accumulating security, defending our territory, when what we actually are is the entire field of awareness itself, temporarily and playfully manifesting as individual perspectives. We're the ocean pretending to be separate waves, the space pretending to be separate objects, the whole pretending to be fragments. And the pretense is exhausting. That's why you're tired. Not just physically tired, but existentially tired. Tired of maintaining the illusion. Tired of defending the separate self. Tired of trying to become something you think you should be instead of recognizing what you already are. The warning isn't that something terrible will happen if we don't wake up. The warning is that something terrible is already happening. We're spending our lives asleep, lost in dreams of separation, missing the extraordinary reality that's present in every moment. We're ghosts haunting our own lives, so busy thinking about existence that we forget to actually exist. If this channel resonates with what you're discovering in your own experience, consider subscribing and joining this exploration. Not as passive consumers of spiritual content, but as fellow travelers waking up from the same dream. This isn't about accumulating more knowledge or techniques. It's about creating space for a recognition that can't be taught but might be remembered, the recognition of what we've always been beneath the layers of conditioning and concept. What would it take to actually hear this warning? Not to understand it intellectually, that's just adding another concept to your collection, but to let it land, to let it shake loose something fundamental in how you relate to being alive. Perhaps nothing less than a complete reversal of your priorities. Instead of constantly trying to get somewhere, accomplish something, become someone, what if you simply stopped? Not stop doing things, life still requires action, but stop the inner argument with reality, the constant commentary, the relentless judgment that this moment isn't quite right and needs to be different. What if you stop trying to fix yourself? Not because you're already perfect in some idealized sense, but because the very project of self-improvement is part of the trance. It assumes you're something separate that needs to be changed, when actually, you're the unchanging awareness in which all change appears. This doesn't mean becoming passive or apathetic. It means acting from a completely different place, not from ego trying to secure itself against a threatening universe, but from the recognition that there's nowhere to get to because you've never been anywhere else. The source, the goal, the journey, they're all right here, all the same reality, just seen from different perspectives. Now we come to the most paradoxical aspect of what's warning. The recognition of what you are doesn't solve your problems in the way the ego wants them solved. You don't suddenly become successful, wealthy, healthy, perfectly content. Life continues with its challenges, its pains, its uncertainties. But something fundamental shifts in your relationship to all of it. Instead of being overwhelmed by the waves, you recognize yourself as the ocean. Instead of being threatened by change, you see yourself as change itself. Instead of trying to defend a separate self against an alien universe, you realize you are the universe, temporarily experiencing itself as this particular person, this particular perspective. The problems don't disappear. But the one who is having the problems, that anxious, defended, separate ego, is seen through. It's recognized as a useful fiction, a convenient way of organizing experience, but not what you fundamentally are. Think of it like this. When you're watching a movie, the characters on screen face real challenges within the logic of the story. Their problems don't become less real to the narrative just because you remember you're watching a movie. But your relationship to those problems completely changes. You can enjoy the drama without being destroyed by it, because you know it's happening within a larger context. This is what's meant by the wisdom of insecurity. It's not about achieving some permanent state of bliss or transcendence. It's about recognizing that the attempt to achieve permanent security is itself the source of anxiety. Security isn't something you attain. It's something you recognize you've always had by virtue of being aware itself, which cannot be threatened because it has no opposite. What dies, what changes, what suffers is always a form, a body, a thought, an identity, a circumstance. But the awareness that knows all forms, that witnesses all change, that experiences all suffering, that never comes or goes. It's the constant in which all variables appear. And that's what you are more fundamentally than anything that appears in you. This isn't meant to minimize the reality of suffering. Physical pain is still pain. Loss is still loss. Tragedy is still tragic within the human story. But there's a difference between pain and suffering, between what happens and our resistance to what happens. Pain is inevitable when you have a body. Suffering is what we add through our stories about the pain, our wish that things were different, our identification with the one experiencing the pain rather than the awareness that knows the experience. So the warning comes down to this. We can continue trying to live as separate egos in a mechanical universe, constantly seeking security, constantly fighting against change, constantly trying to become something other than what we are. And that path leads where it's always led, to anxiety, dissatisfaction, and the sense that no matter what we achieve, something essential is still missing. Or we can wake up. Not tomorrow, not through some lengthy process of spiritual achievement, but right now, in this very moment, by simply noticing what's already here before all our stories about it. The awareness that's reading these words. The presence that exists prior to thought. The consciousness that has never not been with you, even though you've spent your entire life overlooking it. There's a reason we resist this recognition so strongly. It threatens the entire structure we've built our lives around. It suggests that all our striving, all our achievement, all our carefully constructed identity is ultimately beside the point, not wrong, not bad, just not what we fundamentally are. The ego hates this message. It wants to be special, separate, important. It wants there to be a journey, a goal, a future achievement where it finally arrives at enlightenment. But the whole point is that there's nowhere to arrive. You can't get to where you already are. You can't become what you've always been. This is the final barrier. The willingness to be nothing in particular. Not as a practice or an achievement, but as a recognition of what's actually true. You're not this thought or that sensation. You're not this memory or that hope. You're not this body or that personality. You're the aware space in which all of these appear and disappear, and that space has no qualities of its own, it's simply the capacity for experience itself. To be that, to recognize yourself as that, feels like death to the ego. And in a sense, it is. It's the death of the separate self, the death of the one who was trying to get somewhere, achieve something, become someone. But what dies was never real to begin with. It was just a story, a useful fiction, a temporary role you played so thoroughly you forgot you were playing it. And what remains? Everything remains. All of life remains, all of experience remains, all of the beauty and tragedy and comedy of human existence remains. But now it's all happening in you, as you, rather than to some separate entity trying to control and manage it all. Life is living itself through this particular form, this particular perspective, and there's no longer anyone separate who needs defending or protecting or improving. This is what Watts was pointing to in his final years, not as a philosophy to believe in or a technique to practice, but as the simplest, most obvious recognition of what's actually happening right now. The thoughts are happening. The sensations are happening. The perceptions are happening. And prior to all of it, allowing all of it, is the awareness that you are. Not your awareness. Just awareness itself. The same awareness that's present in the person sitting next to you, the dog lying on the floor, the birds singing outside. One consciousness, appearing as multiplicity, playing all the parts in its own cosmic drama, temporarily forgetting itself to make the game more interesting. The warning is that we've taken the game so seriously we've forgotten it's a game. We've become so identified with our role that we think the role is all there is. We're actors who've forgotten their acting, so convinced by their performance that they believe the character is real and the stage is the entire universe. But right now, in this moment, the recognition is available. Not through more thinking, more analysis, more spiritual seeking. Just through a simple shift of attention, from the content of consciousness to consciousness itself. From the movie to the screen. From the waves to the ocean. From the forms to the space in which forms appear. What are you before you think about what you are? What's here before language names it? What remains when everything else is stripped away? Not as philosophical questions to answer with more thoughts, but as invitations to direct recognition. Look right now. Not with your eyes, but with whatever it is that's aware of seeing. Notice that awareness itself has no location, no boundary, no separation. It's not inside your head or outside in the world. It's not here or there. It's the dimension in which here and there appear. This is what we're ignoring when we stay lost in thought, lost in worry, lost in the endless project of trying to become something we're not. We're ignoring the only thing that's actually real, this present awareness, which has never been absent for a single moment of your life and never will be. The warning isn't that we need to save ourselves. It's that there's nothing to save because what we truly are has never been in danger. It's that all our seeking is just the source hiding from itself, pretending not to know what it knows, playing a game of cosmic hide and seek where the hider and seeker are the same. And at some point, often when we're exhausted from seeking, when we've tried everything and nothing has worked, when we finally give up, that's when the recognition becomes obvious. Not because we've achieved anything, but because we've stopped achieving long enough to notice what was always already here. You are the awareness reading these words. Not a personal awareness that belongs to you, but the impersonal space of consciousness itself, momentarily taking the form of a person named you. And that awareness, that conscious presence that's closer than thought, more intimate than breathing, more fundamental than any experience, that's what Watts spent his life pointing to. Not so you could believe it as a philosophy, but so you could recognize it as what you've always been, even when you forgot. Even when you were lost in the story of separation. Even when you were convinced you were just a limited, isolated person struggling in an alien universe. The universe is an alien. It's you. Looking at yourself through these eyes, hearing yourself through these ears, thinking yourself through these thoughts. One reality, infinite perspectives, each necessary for the whole to know itself. His is the warning we're ignoring. That we're spending our brief time in these particular forms searching everywhere for what we already are, trying to become what we've never stopped being, seeking completion when we've never been separate from the totality. And the invitation, always available, never demanding, infinitely patient, is simply to stop. Stop seeking. Stop trying. Stop the endless inner commentary. And in that stopping, notice what remains. Not emptiness in the sense of nothing, but emptiness in the sense of openness, spaciousness, the capacity for everything to appear. The aware presence that's been here all along, witnessing every experience without ever being touched by any of them. That's what you are. That's what we all are. That's what Alan Watts spent his life pointing to, what he warned us we were forgetting, what he invited us to remember before we spend our entire lives asleep. The recognition won't solve all your practical problems. But it will reveal that the one who thought they had problems, that separate, anxious ego, was itself the fundamental problem. And when that's seen through, when the illusion of separation dissolves even momentarily, what remains is just this: life living itself, consciousness knowing itself, being itself. Simple. Obvious. Ordinary. And somehow, simultaneously, the most extraordinary thing in existence.